The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty plains of San Elizario, Texas, as Penelope Barton pressed a cool cloth against her youngest child's forehead, silently counting the hours since their last proper meal. 3 days without food had hollowed her cheeks and weakened her resolve, but she couldn't let the children see her fear, not when they depended on her for their very survival. The summer of 1875 had been unforgiving to the young widow and her 4 children. The drought had claimed their small garden. Her husband's unexpected death from typhoid 6 months prior had claimed their security. And now, hunger threatened to claim what little strength they had left. Their small homestead sat on the outskirts of town, too far for daily trips with 4 children in tow, especially with 5-year-old Thomas suffering from fever. 10-year-old Sarah, the eldest, sat quietly mending a torn shirt by the dim light of their last candle stub. 8-year-old James had fallen asleep on the floor beside his younger brother Matthew, who at 7 years old had stopped asking when they would eat again. Thomas whimpered softly in his mother's arms, too weak to cry properly. "Mama, look," Sarah whispered, pointing toward the window. "There's someone coming." Penelope rose slowly, careful not to disturb Thomas, and peered through the grimy glass. A lone rider approached their homestead, his silhouette growing larger against the darkening sky. Fear gripped her heart. Lone riders seldom brought good news to a woman alone with children. "Sarah, take your brothers to the back room," she instructed, keeping her voice calm despite the panic rising in her chest. "Bolt the door behind you." Reaching for her husband's shotgun, Penelope knew the weapon was useless without ammunition, but perhaps the sight of it would be enough to deter whoever approached. Her hands trembled as she positioned herself by the door, the last barrier between her children and potential danger. The sound of heavy boots on the porch made her breath catch. 3 firm knocks followed. "Madam," a deep voice called. "Mrs. Barton, I've brought some supplies from town." Penelope hesitated, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "Who's asking?" "Vincent Newell, madam. Doc Miller mentioned your situation. I've got food here and medicine for the boy." Lowering the shotgun, Penelope opened the door just enough to peer through the crack. The man standing on her porch was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Behind him, a loaded pack-horse stood patiently. "How do you know about my son?" she asked, still cautious. The man Vincent removed his hat, revealing sun-weathered features and eyes that reminded her of the clear Texas sky. "Doc rode out this way 2 days back, said he was worried about your little one. Mentioned you might be running low on provisions too." "We haven't seen Doc Miller in over a week," Penelope said, confusion evident in her voice. Vincent shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Patterson at the general store mentioned you hadn't been in for supplies. I asked around." He gestured to the pack-horse. "I've brought enough to tide you over. No strings attached, madam, just being neighborly." Desperation finally won out over caution. Penelope stepped back, opening the door wider. "I appreciate the kindness, Mr. Newell, but I have nothing to offer in payment." "None expected," he said simply, returning to his horse to unload several burlap sacks and a wooden crate. As Vincent carried the supplies into the small cabin, Sarah peeked out from the back room, her curious eyes taking in the stranger filling their barren kitchen table with food. "Children, come out," Penelope called softly. "This is Mr. Newell. He's brought us some supplies." The 4 children emerged cautiously, with Sarah carrying Thomas. Vincent nodded to each child, his expression softening when he saw the gaunt face of the youngest boy. "There's medicine for the fever in that small pouch," he said, pointing to a leather bag among the supplies. "And plenty of food to build his strength back up." Penelope's eyes filled with tears as she surveyed the bounty flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar, dried apples, and even a small jar of honey. There was enough to feed them for weeks, not just days. "Mr. Newell, this is too generous," she began, but he held up a hand. "It's Vincent, madam, and it's nothing that won't be repaid in time when your situation improves." Vincent stayed long enough to help her prepare a simple meal of beans and salt pork. He watched silently as the children ate hungrily, their eyes bright with relief. Thomas even managed a few spoonfuls of broth before falling into a peaceful sleep. "I should head back to town," Vincent said once the meal was finished. "But I'll check in on you in a few days, make sure the medicine is working for the boy." "Why would you do all this for strangers?" Penelope asked, walking him to the door. Vincent placed his hat back on his head, considering his answer. "I know what it's like to go hungry, Mrs. Barton. And no child should suffer that fate when there are able bodies around to prevent it." Before she could respond, he was gone, mounting his horse and riding back toward town, leaving Penelope standing in the doorway with gratitude swelling in her heart and the first glimmer of hope she'd felt in months. True to his word, Vincent returned 3 days later. This time he brought not only additional food but also a small wooden toy for Thomas, whose fever had finally broken. "The colors returning to his cheeks," Vincent observed, watching as the boy examined the hand-carved horse. "That's good to see." Penelope nodded, offering him a cup of coffee, a luxury she could now afford thanks to his generosity. "The medicine worked wonders. I don't know how to thank you properly." Vincent accepted the coffee, his calloused fingers brushing against hers momentarily. "Seeing the improvement is thanks enough, Mrs. Barton." "Penelope," she corrected softly. "If I'm to call you Vincent, then you must call me Penelope." A small smile crossed his face. "Penelope," he repeated, as if testing the name. Over coffee, she learned that Vincent ran a small cattle operation outside of San Elizario. He'd come to Texas after the war, looking for a fresh start away from the memories of Virginia and the conflict that had claimed his brothers. "I know something about starting over," Penelope admitted. "My husband Henry and I came from Missouri 3 years ago. He had dreams of building something here for the children." "He chose good land," Vincent commented. "With some work, this place could be productive again." Penelope sighed, glancing out the window at the neglected fields. "Perhaps, but I haven't the strength or knowledge to work it properly. Just keeping the children fed and clothed takes all I have." Vincent was quiet for a moment, contemplating the bottom of his empty cup. "I could help," he finally offered. "Not charity, a partnership of sorts. I've got men who could clear and plow the south field. Good soil there would yield a fine crop come harvest." "Why would you do that?" Penelope asked, unable to hide her suspicion. Men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. That was a hard lesson she'd learned even before Henry's death. Vincent met her gaze directly. "Because I believe in neighbors helping neighbors. Because your children deserve a chance. And because I've got the means to help, so why wouldn't I?" His sincerity was disarming, and Penelope found herself nodding slowly. "A partnership, then. I insist on repaying you eventually. We'll work out the details," he promised, rising to leave. "For now, just focus on getting young Thomas back on his feet." Before departing, Vincent spent time with each child, showing James how to properly whittle wood, admiring Sarah's neat stitches on a mended shirt, listening patiently to Matthew's detailed description of a lizard he'd found, and sitting quietly with Thomas as the boy showed him his few treasured possessions. Penelope watched these interactions with growing warmth. It had been so long since a man had shown kindness to her children, spoken to them as though their thoughts mattered. Henry had been a good father, but his focus had always been on the future, on building something for the children rather than being present with them now. Over the next few weeks, Vincent became a regular visitor at the Barton homestead. True to his word, he brought men to plow the south field and plant a late crop of corn and beans. He repaired the sagging front porch, fixed the leaky roof, and rebuilt the chicken coop that had collapsed during the last storm. Penelope insisted on cooking for Vincent and his men on the days they worked her land. Though resources were still tight, she took pride in serving hearty meals of beans, cornbread, and occasionally rabbit stew when James managed to snare something. "You're a fine cook, Penelope," Vincent commented one evening as they sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the children chase fireflies in the yard. "These meals are worth more than the work we're doing." Penelope laughed softly, the sound surprising her. When had she last laughed? "I doubt that very much, but I appreciate the compliment." In the golden light of sunset, she studied Vincent's profile. The hard lines of his face had softened in the weeks she'd known him. Or perhaps it was just that she saw him differently now, not as a stranger bearing charity, but as a friend. Perhaps even more than a friend, though she quickly pushed that thought away. "The children adore you," she said instead. Vincent smiled, watching as he helped Thomas catch a firefly in his cupped hands. "They're good children. You've done well with them, especially considering the circumstances." "I've done what any mother would do," Penelope replied, though his praise warmed her. "Not any mother," Vincent said quietly. "My own left when I was younger than Matthew. Some burdens are too heavy for some to bear." Penelope's heart ached at the matter-of-fact way he shared this painful piece of his past. "I'm sorry, that must have been difficult," Vincent shrugged. "It shaped me, I suppose, made me understand the importance of community, of helping when you can." He turned to her then, his expression serious. "I want you to know that I'll keep coming back, Penelope, not just until the crop is in or the repairs are done. I made a promise to myself when I first rode out here that I wouldn't let you and these children face the world alone." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Penelope's eyes. "We've imposed on your generosity far too much already." "It's not an imposition," he insisted. "It's a choice. My choice." Their eyes met and held, and Penelope felt something shift between them, an acknowledgement of deeper feelings growing beneath the surface of their practical arrangement. The moment was broken by Thomas running up to the porch, his small hand still cupped around a glowing firefly. "Look, Mr. Vincent, I caught the biggest one." Vincent turned his attention to the boy, his expression gentle. "So you did, partner. That's a mighty fine catch." As summer gave way to fall, the promised crop yielded enough to see them through the winter with careful management. Vincent continued his regular visits, sometimes bringing small gifts: a ribbon for Sarah's hair, a book of adventure stories for James, a small pocket knife for Matthew, and always something special for Thomas, whose health had fully returned. For Penelope, he often brought coffee or sugar luxuries she wouldn't spend their limited funds on, and occasionally a length of fabric or a magazine from back east. But more valuable than any gift was his steady presence, his willingness to listen to her fears and hopes long after the children had gone to bed. On one such evening in late October, they sat before the fireplace, the first real chill of autumn making the warmth welcome. The children were asleep, and a comfortable silence had settled between them. "Why haven't you remarried?" Vincent asked suddenly, his voice low. "A woman like you, intelligent, capable, beautiful, you must have had offers." Penelope's cheeks warmed at his description. "There haven't been offers, despite what you might think. A widow with 4 children isn't exactly a sought-after bride." She paused, twisting her wedding ring, which she still wore. "Besides, marriage hasn't always brought me happiness." Vincent raised an eyebrow, inviting her to continue if she wished. Penelope sighed, staring into the fire. Henry wasn't a bad man. He provided, he didn't drink to excess or raise his hand to me or the children, but there was little warmth between us in the end. He married me because I was practical and strong, not because of any great passion. Is passion important to you? Vincent asked, his voice lower still. Penelope met his gaze, something daring rising within her. I used to think it wasn't. That respect and security were enough. Now I'm not so certain. The air between them seemed to thicken. Vincent leaned forward slightly, then checked himself, running a hand through his hair. I should go, he said, though he made no move to stand. It's getting late. Yes, Penelope agreed, equally motionless. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the newly repaired shutters. Vincent glanced toward the window. Storm's coming. Might be the first norther of the season. You shouldn't ride in that, Penelope said quickly. We have the small room off the kitchen. It's not much, but there's a cot. Vincent hesitated, clearly weighing propriety against practicality. People will talk. People already talk, Penelope countered. A widow receiving regular visits from a bachelor rancher. I assure you the gossips of San Elizario have already decided what they think of me. A smile tugged at Vincent's mouth. And what do they think of me, I wonder? That you're either the most charitable soul in the county or that you have dishonorable intentions, Penelope replied frankly, surprised at her own boldness. Vincent's smile faded, his expression growing serious. And what do you think, Penelope? Their eyes met across the small space, the question hanging between them. Penelope's heart raced as she considered her answer. I think you're a good man, she said finally. The best man I've known, and I think. She hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty. I think I'm falling in love with you. The words, once spoken, could not be taken back. Penelope held her breath, watching Vincent's face for his reaction. For a long moment he was perfectly still. Then he moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. I've been in love with you since the second week, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Since I saw you mending James's shirt by candlelight, humming some tune I didn't recognize, looking so tired but still finding the strength to smile when Thomas showed you a drawing he'd made. Tears filled Penelope's eyes. Why didn't you say anything? Because you needed help, not courtship, Vincent answered. Because you were vulnerable and I never wanted you to think my assistance came with expectations. Penelope squeezed his hands. I know that. I've always known that about you. Vincent reached up to brush a tear from her cheek. I want to court you properly, Penelope Barton. Not because you need a provider or because your children need a father, though I'd be honored to fill both roles, but because you're the woman I want to build a life with. Yes, Penelope whispered, her heart full. I would like that very much. Vincent's smile was radiant as he rose, still holding her hands. Then I'll start tomorrow, proper courting like you deserve. The storm arrived in full force, and Vincent did stay in the small room off the kitchen. In the morning, the children were delighted to find him at the breakfast table, especially when he announced that he would be calling on their mother regularly from now on, in the way a gentleman calls on a lady he admires. Sarah, old enough to understand what this meant, gave her mother a knowing smile across the table. James and Matthew were more interested in Vincent's promise to teach them to ride properly, while Thomas simply climbed into Vincent's lap and asked if this meant he would be staying forever. That will be up to your mother, Vincent replied, glancing at Penelope with hopeful eyes. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Penelope had experienced before. Her marriage to Henry had been arranged by their parents, a practical union with little romance. Vincent, however, approached courting with surprising tenderness and creativity. He brought her wildflowers gathered from the prairies, left poems tucked under her dinner plate, and once arranged for a traveling musician to serenade her from the yard. The children delighted in these romantic gestures as much as Penelope did, often helping Vincent plan his surprises. As November turned to December, Penelope realized that their small homestead had transformed. The fields were prepared for spring planting, the house was fully repaired, and a new sense of security had replaced the desperate fear that had been her constant companion for so long. More importantly, joy had returned to their lives. The children laughed freely now, their bellies full and their futures bright. And Penelope had discovered parts of herself she thought had withered away: her sense of humor, her capacity for hope, her ability to love deeply and without reservation. A week before Christmas, Vincent arrived with his wagon laden with gifts: warm coats for everyone, books, toys, and a small pine tree that the children helped decorate with paper chains and dried berries. That evening, after the excited children had finally gone to bed, Vincent and Penelope sat before the fire, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "I have something for you," he said softly, reaching into his pocket. "Something that can't wait for Christmas." Penelope sat up as Vincent withdrew a small wooden box. Her breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in its center. "It was my grandmother's," he explained, his voice suddenly nervous. "I've had it with me all these years, waiting for the right woman to give it to." "Vincent," Penelope whispered, her eyes filling with tears. He slid from the chair to one knee, taking her hand in his. "Penelope Barton, I came to your door 6 months ago with supplies, never imagining I would find the love of my life. You and your children have become my world, my reason for waking each morning. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The tears spilled over as Penelope nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of devotion. When they finally parted, Penelope rested her forehead against his. "The children will be overjoyed," she said. "They already think of you as their father." "And I already love them as my own," Vincent assured her. "I want us to be a family in every sense of the word." They decided to tell the children on Christmas morning. The day arrived with clear skies and a crisp chill in the air. Penelope woke early to prepare a special breakfast, her heart light with anticipation. Vincent arrived just as the children were stirring, bringing additional presents and a particularly mysterious package he refused to explain. After breakfast and the initial excitement of opening gifts, Vincent gathered the children in the main room. Penelope stood beside him, her hand in his, as he knelt to be at eye level with Thomas. "I have one more gift," Vincent said, looking at each child in turn. "But it's for all of you, and your mother too." He produced an envelope from his jacket and handed it to Sarah, as the eldest. "Would you read it aloud for everyone?" Sarah opened the envelope carefully, unfolding the official-looking document inside. Her eyes widened as she began to read. Deed of transfer for the property known as Willow Creek Ranch, comprising 320 acres of land with main house, barn, and outbuildings. She trailed off, looking up at Vincent in confusion. "You're giving us your ranch," Vincent smiled, shaking his head. "I'm giving us a home. A place where we can all live together, with plenty of room for everyone and good pasture for cattle and horses." He turned to Penelope. "If your mother agrees to marry me and make us a proper family." The children's eyes all turned to their mother, who was struggling to contain her emotions. "I've already said yes," Penelope told them, holding out her hand to show the pearl ring. "If you children approve." There was a moment of stunned silence before chaos erupted. Sarah threw her arms around Vincent's neck. James and Matthew whooped with excitement, and Thomas climbed into Penelope's lap, placing his small hands on her cheeks. "Does this mean Mr. Vincent will be our papa now?" he asked seriously. "If that's what you'd like to call me," Vincent answered, his voice thick with emotion. Thomas considered this carefully, then nodded decisively. "I think I would like that very much." The wedding took place on New Year's Day, 1876, in the small church in San Elizario. The entire town turned out for the occasion, curious to witness the union of the widow Barton and the respected rancher who had courted her so devotedly. Penelope wore a dress of deep blue silk that Vincent had ordered from El Paso, with Sarah's help in determining the correct size. Her hair was arranged with white roses, and she carried a bouquet of winter greenery and dried lavender. Vincent waited at the altar in a new black suit, his usually weathered face clean-shaven and solemn. When Penelope entered on James's arm, the boy having insisted on the honor of giving his mother away, Vincent's expression transformed into one of such pure joy that several of the ladies in attendance dabbed at their eyes. Sarah stood as Penelope's attendant, proudly holding Thomas's hand to keep him from running to his mother mid-ceremony. Matthew carried the rings on a small cushion, his face serious with the responsibility. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent cupped Penelope's face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that even the most skeptical gossips in attendance had to admit this was a genuine love match. The reception was held at the town hall, with tables groaning under the weight of food contributed by every family in San Elizario. There was dancing and laughter, and even Thomas stayed awake far past his bedtime, carried around the dance floor in Vincent's strong arms. As midnight approached, Vincent led his new family out to where his wagon waited, decorated with ribbons and flowers by the townspeople. Their belongings had already been moved to Willow Creek Ranch, and tonight would be their first night in their new home together. The children, exhausted from the excitement, fell asleep almost immediately upon settling into the wagon. Penelope sat beside Vincent on the driver's bench, her head on his shoulder as he guided the horses through the starlit night. "Are you happy, Mrs. Newell?" he asked softly, using her new name for the first time. Penelope looked up at the man who had saved them in more ways than one, the man who had brought food when they were starving, hope when they were despairing, and love when she thought that part of her life was over forever. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she answered truthfully, reaching up to touch his cheek. "You came to our door that day with supplies, and you never stopped coming back." Vincent turned his face to kiss her palm. "And I never will stop coming back to you, Penelope. Not for all the days of my life." The first months of their marriage passed in a blur of joy and adjustment. Moving to Willow Creek Ranch gave each child their own bedroom for the first time, a luxury they embraced with delight. The main house was spacious and well built, with a kitchen twice the size of their old cabin and a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Vincent had prepared the master bedroom with special care, furnishing it with a new feather bed, matching dressers of polished oak, and curtains that Penelope later learned he had ridden 40 miles to select himself. On their wedding night, he carried her across the threshold with reverent tenderness, laying her on the bed as though she were made of precious glass. "Welcome home, my love," he whispered before claiming her lips in a kiss that spoke of long, restrained passion finally finding release. That night, Penelope discovered what her first marriage had lacked: the breathtaking connection of 2 souls joining as completely as their bodies. Vincent was a patient and generous lover, attentive to her pleasure and vocal in his appreciation of every curve and freckle she had once considered flaws. In his arms, Penelope felt beautiful, desired, and cherished beyond measure. Morning brought shy smiles and lingering touches as they dressed, then laughter as they heard the children already exploring their new surroundings, their excited voices carrying through the house. "I suppose we should go show them the rest of the property," Vincent said, buttoning his shirt. "There's the pond beyond the north pasture they haven't seen yet." Penelope nodded, pinning up her hair. "They've never had so much space to roam. You've given them a kingdom, Vincent." He crossed the room to help with a stubborn hairpin, his fingers brushing the nape of her neck. "I've given myself a family. That's the greater gift by far." Life settled into new rhythms at Willow Creek. Vincent taught James and Matthew about ranching, showing them how to mend fences, care for livestock, and read the subtle signs of changing weather. Sarah helped Penelope manage the household, learning to cook on the large iron stove and to preserve the bounty from the kitchen garden they planted together. Thomas followed Vincent like a shadow whenever possible, solemnly carrying tools and asking endless questions. By spring, it was as if they had always been a family. The formal Mr. Vincent had given way to Papa from all 4 children, a title Vincent wore with visible pride. Penelope watched him with her children and marveled at how naturally he had stepped into fatherhood, with a patience and playfulness Henry had never shown. One evening in early April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Penelope took Vincent's hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. "I believe our family will be growing larger by Christmas," she said softly. Vincent's eyes widened, then filled with tears as understanding dawned. "A baby? You're certain?" Penelope nodded, her own eyes misting. "As certain as I can be. I've been through this enough times to recognize the signs." With a cry of joy, Vincent lifted her from her chair and spun her in a circle, then quickly set her down again. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't jostle you. Are you all right? You need to sit or lie down. Should I call for the doctor?" Laughing, Penelope placed her hands on his chest. "I'm perfectly fine, my love. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, and I've successfully delivered 4 healthy children already." Vincent nodded, though concern still creased his brow. "But you'll let me take care of you. No more heavy lifting or working too hard in the garden, and I'll hire someone to help with the house." "If it makes you happy," Penelope agreed, touched by his protective instinct. "You make me happy," Vincent replied, drawing her into a gentle embrace. "You and the children, and now this new little one. I never thought I could be this fortunate." When they shared the news with the children the next day, their reactions varied predictably. Sarah was delighted and immediately began planning how she would help with the baby. James and Matthew were interested but slightly confused about why everyone was making such a fuss. Thomas, however, was distressed. "But I'm the baby," he protested, bottom lip trembling. Vincent knelt before the boy, placing his hands on the small shoulders. "You will always be our first little one, Thomas. Nothing can change that. But now you get to be a big brother too, which is a very important job." Thomas considered this, his face serious. "Will the baby love me more than anything?" Vincent assured him. "And your mother and I will always love you just as much as we do right now." Satisfied with this explanation, Thomas threw his arms around Vincent's neck. "Can I help name the baby?" "We'll all help choose the perfect name," Penelope promised, relieved by how easily the potential crisis had been averted. As Penelope's pregnancy progressed, Vincent's protectiveness intensified. He hired Mrs. Rodriguez from town to help with housekeeping 3 days a week, despite Penelope's protests that she was perfectly capable of managing. He insisted on accompanying her to town for every visit to the doctor, pacing outside the examination room until he was permitted to enter. At home, he monitored her diet, rest, and activities with loving vigilance that occasionally bordered on obsession. When Penelope found him reinforcing the legs of their bed, just in case, she finally confronted him about his anxiety. "Vincent, dearest, I appreciate your concern, but you're acting as though I might break at any moment," she said gently, sitting beside him on the porch swing one evening. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know I'm being excessive. It's just," he broke off, his expression pained. "Just what?" Penelope prompted, taking his hand. "My mother died in childbirth," Vincent admitted quietly. "Her and the baby both. I was 12. It's why my father couldn't cope, why he started drinking, why he eventually sent me and my brothers to live with our uncle." Understanding dawned. Penelope moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Vincent. I didn't know." "I should have told you," he said, "instead of just acting like a madman." "You're acting like a man who loves his wife and has suffered loss," Penelope corrected. "But I need you to trust that I'm strong and healthy. My previous deliveries were all relatively straightforward." Vincent nodded, placing his hand on the swell of her abdomen. "I do trust you, and I'll try to be less overwhelming." "Perhaps just slightly less," Penelope teased, kissing his cheek. "I rather enjoy some of your attentions." As the summer heat intensified, Vincent insisted on moving their bedroom to the ground floor to spare Penelope the stairs. He also built a small play area with shade near the house where she could watch the children without exerting herself in the sun. The entire ranch seemed to revolve around the coming baby. The hands who worked for Vincent brought gifts of handmade toys and tiny moccasins. Sarah spent hours sewing tiny garments under Mrs. Rodriguez's tutelage. James and Matthew constructed an elaborate wooden cradle with Vincent's help, while Thomas solemnly collected the softest feathers he could find for a special pillow. By September, with the baby due in just 3 months, Vincent began making arrangements for the birth. He persuaded the doctor to stay at the ranch for the week surrounding Penelope's expected delivery date, and converted the study into a temporary medical room with all the supplies the doctor requested. "Don't you think this is excessive?" Penelope asked as Vincent installed a new bell system that would allow her to summon help from anywhere in the house. "I prefer to think of it as thorough," Vincent replied, testing the bell one last time. "Indulge me, love. It helps me feel less helpless." Penelope relented, recognizing that his preparations were as much for his peace of mind as for her comfort. And truthfully, she found his dedication endearing, so different from Henry's distant concern during her previous pregnancies. October brought an unexpected challenge when a group of cattle rustlers began targeting ranches in the area. Vincent was forced to spend several nights patrolling with his men, returning home exhausted and increasingly worried about leaving Penelope alone. "I don't like being away from you right now," he confessed one night as they lay in bed, his hand protectively covering her rounded abdomen. "But I can't risk losing the herd, not with the baby coming and winter approaching." "We'll be fine," Penelope assured him. "The children and I have Mrs. Rodriguez staying over when you're gone, and Sarah is surprisingly capable with your rifle." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "You've been teaching Sarah to shoot," she asked to learn, Penelope explained, "and it seemed prudent given the circumstances." A smile spread across Vincent's face. "You continue to amaze me, Penelope Newell. Most women would be fretting and demanding their husbands stay home." "I'm not most women," Penelope reminded him, "and you're not most husbands. We're partners in this life we're building, which means sometimes you need to protect our livelihood while I protect our home." Vincent pulled her closer, kissing her deeply. "I fall more in love with you every day." The rustling problem was resolved by the end of the month when the county sheriff organized a group of ranchers, including Vincent, to set a trap that resulted in the capture of the entire gang. With that worry behind them, the family turned their attention to preparing for both the coming baby and the Christmas holiday. On a crisp December morning, with frost silvering the grass and the children still sleeping, Penelope woke to the first contractions. She lay quietly for a few minutes, timing the sensations before gently waking Vincent. "It's time," she whispered, touching his cheek. Vincent was instantly alert, his eyes wide. "The baby, now, are you certain?" Penelope nodded, surprisingly calm. "Very certain, but there's no need to panic. First babies often take their time arriving. Would you send one of the hands for the doctor while I wake Sarah? She'll want to help prepare." Despite her reassurances, Vincent moved with barely controlled urgency, helping her to a sitting position before pulling on his clothes and rushing to send for the doctor. By the time he returned, Sarah was already bustling around the bedroom, laying out clean linens and heating water as Penelope had instructed her. "What can I do?" Vincent asked, his voice steadier than his expression. "Keep the boys occupied," Penelope suggested. "They'll be excited and worried, and they don't need to see me in pain." Vincent nodded, clearly relieved to have a specific task. "I can do that, but you'll send for me if you need anything. Anything at all. You'll be the first to know," Penelope promised, touched by his concern. The doctor arrived an hour later, by which time Penelope's contractions were coming regularly but still manageable. He examined her and confirmed that everything was progressing normally, though it would likely be several more hours before the baby arrived. Vincent divided his time between entertaining the boys outside and checking on Penelope, his face growing more anxious with each visit as her pain visibly increased. "Perhaps you should wait downstairs," the doctor suggested kindly after Vincent's 10th appearance in the doorway. "I assure you, Mrs. Newell is doing remarkably well, and Sarah is providing excellent assistance." Penelope, breathless between contractions, reached for Vincent's hand. "It's all right, love. This is the natural way of things. Go reassure the children that all is well." Reluctantly, Vincent retreated downstairs, where he found Thomas sitting solemnly on the bottom step. "Is Mama going to die?" the boy asked directly, Vincent's heart constricted at the fear in his son's eyes. Sitting beside him, he put an arm around the small shoulders. "No, Thomas. Your mother is very strong, and the doctor is taking good care of her. Having a baby is hard work, but women are made for it." Thomas leaned against him. "Papa died when he got sick, and Sarah said once that Mama almost went to heaven when I was born because I was turned the wrong way." Vincent silently cursed himself for not anticipating this fear. Of course the children would be terrified of losing another parent. "Your mother is healthier now than she was when you were born," Vincent assured him, choosing his words carefully. "She has good food and rest and people who love her. And the doctor says everything is proceeding exactly as it should." Thomas seemed only partially convinced. "Will you stay with me until the baby comes? I don't want to be alone." "I won't leave you," Vincent promised, holding the boy close. "We'll wait together." As the day progressed, Vincent gathered all 4 children in the parlor, reading to them from their favorite books and playing simple card games to distract them from the occasional sounds of their mother's labor. James and Matthew eventually relaxed enough to play checkers, but Thomas remained glued to Vincent's side, while Sarah divided her time between helping the doctor and checking on her brothers. When darkness fell, Mrs. Rodriguez arrived to prepare dinner, shooing the men out of her kitchen and filling the house with comforting smells of beef stew and fresh bread. The children ate despite their worry, but Vincent found he could barely swallow, his throat tight with anxiety as Penelope's labor intensified. Just as Mrs. Rodriguez was clearing the dinner dishes, a thin cry pierced the evening quiet. The children froze, their eyes wide, as Vincent rose to his feet, heart hammering. Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs, her face flushed and her apron stained, but her eyes shining with joy. "It's a boy, a healthy baby boy. Mama's asking for all of you." The children rushed up the stairs, Vincent following close behind, his legs suddenly unsteady. In the bedroom, Penelope sat propped against pillows, her face pale but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. The doctor was putting away his instruments, looking satisfied with the outcome. "Come meet your brother," Penelope said softly as the family gathered around the bed. Vincent hung back, overwhelmed by relief and a love so powerful it momentarily robbed him of speech. Penelope looked up, meeting his gaze over the children's heads, and smiled a smile so intimate it was as if they were the only two people in the room. "Would you like to hold your son?" she asked, extending the bundle toward him. Moving forward as if in a dream, Vincent carefully took the baby, staring down at the tiny red face and shock of dark hair. "He's perfect," he whispered, voice breaking. "Just like his mother." "What's his name?" Thomas asked, standing on tiptoes to see. Vincent looked to Penelope, who nodded encouragingly. They had discussed names but wanted to wait until they saw their child before deciding. "Robert Vincent Newell," Vincent announced. "After my father and, well, me. We'll call him Bobby," Penelope added, reaching for Vincent's hand. "If everyone approves." The children nodded solemnly, even Thomas, who seemed to have accepted his new role as older brother with unexpected grace. That night, after the doctor had departed with promises to return the next day and the children had finally gone to bed, Vincent sat beside Penelope, watching as she nursed their son. "Thank you," he said simply. Penelope looked up, her expression questioning. "For what?" "For everything," Vincent replied. "For letting me help when you had nothing, for trusting me with your children's future, for loving me, for giving me Bobby." His voice caught on their son's name. "I never thought I could be this happy." Penelope shifted the baby to her shoulder, patting his back gently. "I should be thanking you. You saved us in every way a person can be saved." Vincent shook his head. "We saved each other." As if in agreement, Bobby gave a tiny hiccup, making both parents smile. Vincent reached out to stroke the downy head, marveling at the perfection of his tiny features. "You remember the day we met?" Penelope asked softly. "I had no food for 3 days. The children were hungry, Thomas was sick, and I was at the end of my rope. Then you arrived with those supplies." "Like a guardian angel," Vincent teased, echoing Sarah's words from months ago. "Like a miracle," Penelope corrected. "You brought food, but more importantly, you brought hope, and you never stopped coming back." Vincent leaned forward to kiss her forehead, then the baby's. "And I never will," he promised. "Not as long as I live." Christmas that year was a subdued but joyful affair, with Bobby barely 2 weeks old and Penelope still regaining her strength. Vincent insisted on handling all the preparations, with help from the older children and Mrs. Rodriguez. They set up the tree in the parlor where Penelope could recline on the sofa with the baby, overseeing the decorating while conserving her energy. The gifts were simple but thoughtful: new clothes for the growing children, books, homemade sweets, and small toys. Vincent presented Penelope with a delicate gold locket containing a lock of Bobby's dark hair on one side and a tiny portrait of all 6 of them on the other, commissioned months earlier in anticipation of the baby's arrival. "So you always have us close to your heart," he explained as he fastened it around her neck. Penelope's gift to Vincent was equally meaningful: a leather-bound family Bible with all their names inscribed inside, including Bobby's, officially documenting their blended family for generations to come. As they sat together that evening, the children playing with their new gifts while Bobby slept peacefully in his cradle, Vincent took Penelope's hand. "You know what I was thinking about earlier?" he asked. Penelope shook her head, smiling. "Tell me." "I was remembering how I almost didn't come to your homestead that day," Vincent admitted. "I'd heard about a widow with children who might be struggling, but I hesitated, worried you might see it as charity or that I was overstepping." "What changed your mind?" Penelope asked curiously. Vincent glanced at the children, his expression softening. "I remembered my own mother, how proud she was, how she struggled to accept help even when she needed it desperately. I thought about what might have happened if someone had insisted on helping her, even against her wishes." He squeezed Penelope's hand. "So I loaded up those supplies and rode out, telling myself I'd leave them on your porch if you refused to accept them directly. I never imagined that decision would lead to all of this." Penelope leaned against his shoulder, watching as Sarah helped Thomas with his new wooden puzzle. "It's strange to think how differently our lives might have turned out if you hadn't come that day. The children and I might not have survived that summer." "Don't say that," Vincent whispered, his arm tightening around her. "Even thinking about it hurts." "But that's exactly why it's important to remember," Penelope insisted. "To appreciate how precious this life is, how fortunate we are to have found each other." Vincent nodded slowly. "You're right, as usual." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Newell." "Merry Christmas, Mr. Newell," she replied, tilting her face up to meet his lips. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Newell family. Bobby grew into a sturdy, curious toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. The older children thrived under Vincent's guidance. Sarah developed into a talented horsewoman. James showed a natural aptitude for ranching. Matthew discovered a passion for books and learning. And Thomas revealed an unexpected talent for music when Vincent brought home a used piano from an estate sale in El Paso. In the spring of 1878, Penelope gave birth to twin girls, Alina and Victoria, completing their family. Vincent's anxiety during this pregnancy was somewhat less intense, though he still hovered protectively until both mother and daughters were safely delivered and recovering well. The ranch prospered under Vincent's management, expanding to include additional grazing land and a small orchard that became Penelope's special project. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, though they kept the original structure as a guest house for the frequent visitors. They hosted Vincent's uncle from Virginia, Penelope's childhood friend from Missouri, and various neighbors and business associates who were drawn to the warmth and hospitality of Willow Creek Ranch. Through it all, Vincent and Penelope's love only deepened. The passion they discovered in the early days of their marriage mellowed into something even more precious, a partnership built on absolute trust, mutual respect, and unwavering devotion. They faced each challenge together, from drought years that threatened the herd to childhood illnesses that kept them awake for nights on end. They celebrated each success as a family, marking milestones large and small with equal enthusiasm. When Sarah received an offer to study at a women's college back east, Vincent and Penelope supported her ambition, even as they prepared themselves for her absence. When James announced his intention to marry the daughter of a neighboring rancher, they welcomed the young woman into their family with open arms. Through all the changes, they never forgot where they began, a desperate young widow with 4 hungry children and a compassionate cowboy who brought supplies and never stopped coming back. On their 10th wedding anniversary, with their 7 children, including James's new bride, gathered around them, Vincent raised a glass in toast. "To beginnings disguised as endings," he said, his eyes finding Penelope's across the table. And to the day, a woman too proud to ask for help opened her door to a man too stubborn to stop knocking. Penelope smiled, the years falling away as she remembered that first meeting, how frightened she had been, how desperate, and how Vincent's arrival had changed everything. "To love that sustains us," she added, raising her own glass. "And to the family we built together, one day at a time." Later that night, as they stood on the porch of their home watching the stars emerge in the Texas sky, Vincent wrapped his arms around Penelope from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Are you happy, my love?" he asked, the question an echo from their wedding night so many years ago. Penelope turned in his embrace to face him, noting the silver threading his dark hair, the laugh lines deepening around his eyes, the strength and kindness still evident in his face despite the passing years. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully. "Every day with you is a blessing I never expected to receive." Vincent kissed her then, tenderly, with the familiarity of long-time lovers and the reverence of a man who had never taken his good fortune for granted. "When I rode up to your homestead that day," he murmured against her lips, "I was only thinking of bringing supplies to a family in need. I never imagined I was riding toward my own heart's home." "And when I opened that door," Penelope replied, her fingers tracing the beloved contours of his face, "I was only hoping for food to keep my children alive. I never dreamed I was opening the door to a love that would save us all." Vincent smiled, taking her hand to lead her inside, toward the warmth and light of the home they had built together. "And I never stopped coming back." "And you never will," Penelope finished, following him into their future, step by loving step, just as they had walked together for the past 10 years and would for all the years to come.